Welcome, 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 dear sister soul. So I'm here at the top of, let's say, the upper slopes of Mount Shasta in this incredibly magical elven forest area where her pristine beauty is just pulsating with Gaia's heart love. And so I want to start with that because it's so present. It's so present for us all right now. Those of us that deeply care and love Mother Gaia, those of us that deeply care for the soul of life, those of us that know that we're here to make a difference, that are willing to do what it takes for the healing of all of life on our beloved planet. There's a place that we need to find within ourselves. And this is, I feel, the most fundamental veil that needs to open and thin for us all in a gradual process, and will be in the coming days. And it has to do with a more deeply embodied grokking of what's happening here. What's happened to us as mystic souls, as evolutionary women who have incarnated in many lifetimes on this earth. The role that those lifetimes have played in our present state today, what we're experiencing in this very moment of planetary change. And then also how we can continue to seat ourselves deeper and deeper in that knowing, in that gnosis, to reclaim the sovereignty of our own bodies, of our own life, and all of life here on earth. And so I want to share about this personally now, because this gnosis inside of myself has come through my own deep, deep levels of soul healing of many incarnations, many of which my body field was much more open than it is today. And also working with other mystic feminine souls in that same process. And what becomes revealed in all of that is the common story of humanity. What we see on the outer levels as patriarchal colonization that has happened through the ages of time for thousands of years now, even though the Industrial Revolution only began fairly recently, but this process of colonization has been going on for thousands of years. The main targets of that has always been the indigenous people whose gateways were wide open to Mother Gaia, who lived in those multidimensional realms and played a vital service to her planetary sphere in that. And women, specifically the wombs of women and children. And why is that? Because if those energies and if those programs and the structures of those programs, which actually have an energetic form to them, if they're able to get into the wombs of women, which they have, then they can be passed down for generations and generations on end. So this soul that's in this body here today has lived many lifetimes. My soul has lived many lifetimes so far, and what I've done the healing on so far, and that is open for me so far, it's been at least 45 lifetimes that I've remembered and actively worked on healing. And a good portion of these lifetimes, my body gateways, my Ka body gateways, which are the gateways that open us to Mother Gaia's omnipresence as a lived experience, moment by moment, breath by breath. And again, in many ancient and indigenous cultures, these gateways were wide open, so that their very experience of life, and this is probably true in some indigenous cultures that are still around today, I think most of them it's true, their very experience of life is entirely different than ours. Why is that? Because experience different from the inside out. There's actual gateways that are more open in their body field that has been passed down through the DNA. And some of these ancient and indigenous cultures, most of them, the body gateways were so wide open that they were in active service with Mother Gaia from the inside out on the innermost realms of existence. And so I'm not going to get into speaking for indigenous cultures today. They're doing that so well on their own, and it's not my place because I wasn't incarnated in this lifetime into such a culture. But my ancestry in this lifetime, my father is Ethiopian, and my mother is European, Scandinavian actually, Scandinavian descent. But my father was born in Ethiopia into a tribal culture there. And so I do have that in my ancestry, in my DNA from this lifetime. And on my mother's side, I have the European, Scandinavian lineage, which way back was indigenous, but has been very colonized for many, many centuries now. And so in my own experience of life now, I have this amalgamation going on. I have this ancient indigenous knowing waking up in my very body field, where as I continue with my own healing, my body is flowering open more and more and more to Mother Gaia's planetary sphere, and experiencing myself at one with her, and actively working on the inner realms of life in co-creation with her and all of the natural world. So, and that's coming directly from my healing of past lives, of previous incarnations where I was doing that actively then. And then there's this incarnating into this body and the familial lineage that I incarnated into now, which is on one side Ethiopian, on the other side European, of European descent or Scandinavian descent. But a second, third generation here in the United States. So I have this amalgamation going on, and I'm just grokking in these days how that has been running the show in my experience of life. And I want to share about this because I feel like this will offer some great inquiries into your own experience, into the own amalgamation of what's going on for you that's from your previous incarnations, as the experiences of your own soul, as well as what you've been born into in this lifetime, as well as your experiences in moving through this lifetime, in this incarnation. And so I have that in my deep in my soul matrix, some key lifetimes. And even two of those lifetimes were here in the United States, recent lifetimes. Here in the United States, in First Nations cultures, in indigenous cultures that were colonized, and the traumas that we experienced through that, which ultimately was massacres, just complete massacres of both of the tribal families that I was born into and the different incarnations. So in my soul, I've experienced those traumas. And then there are similar traumas that happen since even 10,500 BC, where entire populations that had those gateways open like that were shut down by those same energies that were experienced in patriarchal colonization today. It just looks a little different today, but it's the same energies of brutal, violent suppression of the mother's organic body of life as lived through our own body fields, male and female. And so two of those incarnations that I had, very recent in the United States, for me recent, the 1800s is recent in my soul's her story, which I've remembered incarnations as back as 12,500 BC. So these are experienced in me as very recent, very raw, and what has shaped my willingness to be sort of expressed fully in my knowingness of interdimensional living of indigenous living. I like that word better because interdimensional, it starts to sound new agey and kind of mechanical. It's not that. It's organic living. The full, vast and deep realms of organically living with Mother Gaia. And since those incarnations happened fairly recently in my soul's her story, and then other incarnations of being of African descent, also experiencing slavery, also experiencing being in the same kind of very open indigenous tribe in Africa and being captured into slavery. So you can see the pattern here. In these lifetimes where our gateways are most open, the patriarchal colonization comes in, shuts us down not only physically, shuts us down as in death or captivity, brutal captivity, on the multidimensional level, all of the influences that come in to our body fields, and those influences and those energetic structures get carried over in our karmic matrix. It's not left behind there. It's actually built into the bodies we grew into today. So what we need to understand is that when we incarnate into our mother's wombs as a soul, we incarnate into, right now the way things are, we incarnate into a karmic matrix. When the soul enters into a womb at a certain point, the karmic matrix kicks in and begins to shape the body, along with the DNA from the parents and what other influences might be there. So as we're even being shaped in our mother's womb, as we're gestating there, there's many influences that come into the actual shaping of our body field, energetically and physically. And therefore, our energetic experience of life, our capacities to live open organically, in the full dimensions of Mother Gaia, all of that begins to be shaped in our mother's womb. And so I've experienced in my own life this flip-flopping. And what I mean by this flip-flopping is as I continuously open to this lived gnosis of working in co-creation with Mother Gaia, with all of the beloved beings of the natural world, of my own bodily restoration into the magnitude of this body's capacities and my soul's love, my soul's just pure love for life. I have watched myself do this in significant times in my life, at least several times, and that I'm hitting up against that place inside of myself again now. And so I've experienced several times in my life so far when I have just gotten rid of everything. I've literally just cleaned out everything material in my life in a very tangible way to free myself up, to dive deeper and surrender deeper into my spiritual journey. And the first significant time I did that was when it was like my first level of surrender, if you will, into living a life dedicated to my own soul's awakening in a very tangible way. The first time I did that is when I went to India. And I literally gave away and sold everything I owned. I went down to 2 boxes and stowed them in a friend's garage. And those were just memorabilia, diaries, and things like that. Everything that was material that had to do with my house, every stitch of clothing I had, except what I was wearing and bringing with me to India. I literally got rid of it all. And it was the most freeing experience I have ever had in my life. It was the first time I did that. And so there's this vast freedom when you do that. You feel completely unencumbered by material belongings. I didn't even have a storage area or anything. It was just everything was gone. And there was an immense amount of freedom in that. And I rode that river of freedom all the way through living for a year in India and entering into a monastic lifestyle. And that monastic lifestyle then lasted for 10 years. And that's a whole longer story, but I'm talking about lifestyle choices here. So living in an ashram environment, having very few belongings, and my whole internal as well as external world dedicated to service to the divine, surrender and service to the divine. And there became a certain point when I started feeling encumbered in that as well. And there are certain trappings of tradition and things that I didn't agree with that were happening and all of that. So at a certain point, again, I left everything. And I left everything that time. The everything that time was less material, though there was some things I had accumulated in that experience. The everything I left in that time were positions of leadership, steady income from the organization, from my teaching, a secure home and lifestyle, and being a part of a community. I left all of that with that same movement of releasing myself into the arms of the mother, of letting her care for me. And I didn't know how I was going to support myself materially. That was my biggest concern, of course, as it would be most people's. When I lived in Lake Titicaca in Peru, I lived in a house, a small house on a beach in the middle of nowhere, on the island of the sun. And if you've ever been there, it's just a magnificent, I highly recommend to go there on retreat if you haven't been there in this lifetime. I can't recommend it enough. Deeply sacred place on Mother Gaia's body. And the magnificent indigenous people that live there, they've managed to keep it sacred. I don't know how they did it, but they managed to do it. And so there's no cars on the island. At the time I was there was very little electricity. So I lived in a house that had no running water and no electricity. And it got cold. And there was no fireplace either. And it got cold there. And so I would just have to bundle up and everything at night. And you just get used to that. You get used to it. The body is so intelligent. Our bodies can learn to adjust in a very short period of time. If we know how to breathe into and work with our body in that way, our bodies can adjust in a very short period of time to all different kinds of environmental conditions. And so although it wouldn't go completely into winter while I was there, it got very cold at different times. And you just learn how to layer up and bundle and get used to it and breathe with it and relax into it. And what I want to share here is that was the time in my life when I felt the absolute most free, most unencumbered, most connected to Mother Gaia's body of life. And it was during that period of time lasted for 3 months, and I would have stayed there for a lot longer, but my visa ran out. They only let you in Bolivia for 3 months at a time. But that was the most free I've ever felt in my life. And I had no running water, no electricity, no fireplace to keep me warm. In fact, there's very little firewood or fuel on the island itself. No clock. I never knew what time it was. And I just had the rhythms. I began to relax into the rhythms of nature. And there was a certain point when I began to grok, because when you go into that, what we live in the society, in the Western world today, it looks very far away. I had sunk so deeply into that, I didn't know if my life was ever going to change. I seriously thought about taking residency there, about that being my life from then forward. The guidance I got was not to do that, but I did consider that for a long period of time. And I considered it because I was happy. Fundamentally, deeply, and utterly happy. And when I looked at the way that we lived, and looked back at my life in the United States, even my life in the ashram, it looked utterly insane. Not only just ridiculous, it looked and felt to me absolutely insane. The complete unnecessariness of the accumulation of goods, of comfort, of wealth, all of it looked absolutely insane to me. And that was the first time I got this glimpse of the veils opening and what I wished for my own life. And of course, it was during that period of time too when the veils fully parted for me, and I had my first initial shift into Great Mother realization. Those two things went hand in hand. And I really want to underline this point because this was true for me and it may be true for some of you mystic souls, if not really at a deeper level, all of us. That our capacities to fully enter into true primal belonging with the Mother of Life are greatly, greatly diminished and even thwarted by our lifestyles in this Western world. In this producer-consumer comfort. Let's face it, that's what it's about. It's about comfort in this comfort-based world. And that having comfort has absolutely nothing to do with realization. Absolutely nothing. Material comfort, I'm talking here. And I really want us to feel into that and to breathe into that right now, that possibility inside of ourselves. That having material comfort not only has nothing to do with realization, with Great Mother realization, but it actually keeps us from our deepest, most embodied, primal realization of her. And what I want to share here, the reason why I'm sharing with you my personal experiences, because even after these experiences that I've had, where I've tangibly experienced the most free times in my life is when I've literally had nothing and very little material comfort. In those experiences, I have felt the most free, the most unencumbered, and the most happy of my entire life. And this is where I want to get really real and raw about my own experience. Even with all of that, even with having those experiences under my belt as a real deep knowing in my soul, in my body, in my heart, in my womb, even with that, even with opening to vast and deep states of actively working with Mother Gaia on a regular basis, really even 24/7 these days, even with that, I find myself today living in the kind of lifestyle of producer-consumer capitalism. And I'm just being honest here. Because even what I really want to convey here is that even with all of that, with my greatest spiritual intentions, I'm having to look at why I've been doing that until now. And I can feel the change already happening within me. The shift out of that. But this time, I'm clear I want it to be for good, for real. So that I leave the chains of this kind of lifestyle behind as a permanent way of living. And that I can invite others into that as well. But I can't do that until I walk my talk fully, can I? And this is the personal part I really want to share here. I've been in deep reflection, as I hope all of us have, around my lifestyle in these days. And I've noticed how even when I was in a monastic lifestyle, there were times when I absolutely, it's like I just wanted to buy something for myself. There was just this urge of wanting to buy and to feel like nourished in that. And this wasn't all the time. It was just something that came in every now and then. And I've noticed how since after this deep excavation and going on retreat and literally having basically no income for a year at least, and then coming back into work, and I feel like I've been sort of being steadily entrained back into the capitalistic society. And so it's a moment of real reckoning for me. And I've had to look at, wow, I've had these, I know better because I've experienced better. So what's there? What's there that has pulled me back into this web? And it is a web, it's a grid. It is the matrix. But what I want us to know here, and what I want us to explore and bring forward for the sake of all of life, for the sake of the mother that we love, for the sake of the soul of existence, is that that grid, that matrix is not only outside of us, it's embedded in our cells. It's programmed into our DNA. It's passed down to us from our ancestors. It's passed down to us from the experience of colonization. Both sides of that coin. Some of us have even had lifetimes where we've been the colonizer. And guess what? Dear sister souls, most of us are the colonizer today. As long as we're living in this lifestyle, we are that. But we can't just think our way out of it. We can't greenwash our way out of it. And we certainly can't just decide, I'm going to give it all up and try to find a better way. It doesn't work. I know that firsthand. We have to excavate those programs out of our very body fields. Excavate where they've come in through our DNA. Be willing to look and see what's actually there in the cells of our bodies, and there are actual energetic structures there. And so this is not a doomsday message. This is a call to action. The deepest kind of internal action of self-revealing, of excavation, of willing to be look and to see and allow our inner veils to part, to see the level of energy, because these implants and programs and all of this that I'm describing, they happen on a certain level of our energetic field that is deeply, deeply embedded into our elemental body. So it's a different level of energy than we would see our chakras or our pranic fields or our energy fields that a lot of us have opened to already. The reason why we don't see it is because our inner veils have been closed over that particular level of energy. But I've seen it again and again and again. When we open to that level of energy, it begins to self-reveal to us the absolutely massive amounts of implants and programs in our body fields. It is shown. When we open to that level of energy, it's systematically shown. And then our body gets on board, and our body wants to push these out because they're not native to her. They're not organic to her. Our body field wants these energies out, these structures out, so she can reclaim her organic majesty, her primal belonging to Mother Gaia, and the true fulfillment that we're designed to live. And so the last piece that I want to deeply express here is that we are entering into a period of great mother dissolution in Mother Gaia's planetary field, where the energies of Mother Earth she is systematically now, along with a whole team of us on the inner realms, are systematically removing these same kinds of implants and programs from her actual Earth body. And in the process, the collective field, our veils are being parted. And it's coming from the deepest, innermost recesses of life out. It's coming from our elemental bodies, actually, is where it's coming from. So those veils are beginning to open in the collective, and so we'll see that more and more in the coming days. Things are going to be revealed about what's operating behind the scenes of the physical here on Earth. And of course, not everybody will be open enough to seeing those things, but certainly those of us who are born to live from that place, to allow that to happen, to enjoin ourselves with Mother Gaia, her organic body of life, and all of the beings on the inner realms of nature and the outer expression of nature that are just right there when we're willing to open to them. To enjoin with them in this process, in what I call her quiet revolution on the innermost realms of life. By being willing to excavate those same energies out of our own biological field, our own elemental body. We are supported to do that in these days exponentially by Gaia's planetary field of life. And so as always, the invitation is not to believe me in all this that I've expressed. I really don't want you to believe me. I don't want this to be another sort of information that you then just put away in your mind to check into later. The invitation here is to begin to drop into deep inquiry in your own body field and discover the truth within you. Discover the truth of what's already there in terms of patriarchal colonization. What gives us the impulse to consume? What gives us the impulse to even culturally appropriate from other cultures that have more of these gateways open inside of themselves? What gives us this primal urge to continue on with lifestyles that are obviously going against Mother Gaia's body of life? To continue with these inquiries in the deepest, most possible way and let it be self-revealed to you. And from there, you receive all of the support to begin to restore your primal body unto her body of life and enter into real, raw belonging, deep co-creation, and true elemental aliveness, the aliveness you were born to be, true fulfillment in life. So blessings to you, dear sister soul, on this process. May your excavation be deep and strong. All of my love to you. Blessings.